We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special show, we're talking politics, the Second Amendment and drug regulation, and a whole lot more. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcast, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Is democracy in peril? Is the soul of the nation on the brink? That's what we're going to find out today on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network from your flagship station in Washington, D.C., WWRC. And we're joined by none other than longtime host of this here show and Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Tim Donner, soul of the nation, in peril or not? Your thoughts?
Well, I think people on both sides believe the soul of the nation is in peril. On the Republican side, the Trump side, the MAGA side, the conservative side, the soul of the republic is threatening to be poisoned and stained by the most anti-democratic movement we've seen in a long time, which is the pro-Hamas, anti-Jew protests on college campuses. And let's call it for what it is. It isn't just anti-Israel. It isn't just pro-Palestine. It's anti-Jew. These are movements that want to wipe Jews off the face of the earth, and we need not mince words about it. So that is the most blatant threat to democracy. It has easily supplanted January 6th as the so-called democracy issue in this election as far as most voters, I think, are concerned.
Tim, you know, it's funny that a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people would argue back that just because they are not, just because they're not supporting Israel in this battle, that doesn't mean that they're anti-Jewish or that they're pro-Hamas. However, I believe it was Douglas Murray, the British author, and well, let's call him polemicist because that's pretty much a good way to look at what he is. Great mind him, but he points out something similar to this that, and forgive me, Mr. Murray, if you are listening and I paraphrase this incorrectly, but if you were, for example, if you were supporting one particular issue and that issue was supported by neo-Nazis who wander around in Nazi regalia, and you could say, and would you try and make the case that, no, I'm not supporting them, I'm just supporting the same cause as them. Now, how comfortable would you feel doing that in polite society?
Well,
Probably not so much, right?
Not very. And I think that, it's important to point out, too, that these protesters, these rabid anti-Semites who are basically shutting down one campus after another. Columbia has canceled its graduation. It's ruined its reputation, which it had taken really since 1968 to rebuild, and now they've thrown it all to the wind because of their refusal to stand up to these savages who are threatening Jewish students, doing encampments and a beautiful quad there, the whole thing. I think when the issue of democracy comes up, that the left loves to say that Donald Trump is a wannabe authoritarian, that he will be a dictator on day one, which he teased them with. And of course, as usual, he did something basically tongue-in-cheek, and they took it and ran with it with a very serious reaction to dictator on day one. The problem with claiming that Trump will be an authoritarian is that this is a guy who's already been president for 4 years, and Americans can see what he did and did not do in office. They saw how, as a matter of fact, even in the midst of the Russia collusion hoax, which was one of the most cruel hoaxes ever perpetrated by a political party in America, he still didn't lash out and throw people in prison. the way that Joe Biden is trying to throw him in prison. And yes, let's just say it. Joe Biden, did he order Fonnie Willis and did he order Letitia James and the rest of them to try and throw Trump into prison? Probably not. But he didn't need to. They all knew what the marching orders were from the top, and it was unspoken, and now it has exploded back in their faces like an unexploded ordnance that they just stepped on. And they honestly, Mark, don't know what to do about it except try to buy off voters.
Yeah, we spoke about that in the last episode. Now, it's funny, you say that they're worried about him being authoritarian. They are, that there's Robert De Niro, the actor. He was recently on, I think it was some late night talk show, talking about this guy's going to be a Mussolini, this guy's going to be a fascist, he's authoritarian. And the whole world must have been sat there thinking, but we saw what Donald Trump did. And Donald Trump, if conservatives would have one complaint about Donald Trump, it's that Donald Trump, I think, kept getting rolled over by the courts. And every time he tried to do something, he would get shut down in the courts and therefore have to scrap it. That's not what an authoritarian does. An authoritarian steamrolls those courts. He doesn't
basically
back down and look for another route.
And breaches the law of the land for his own personal purposes and to consolidate his own power. So this whole issue of authoritarianism, again, this has just faded out like every other Biden failed attempt to convince the electorate that he should have 4 more years. You know, I'm going to point out again the irony of all this, Mark, because I've said this before. Joe Biden could have been a hero for the Democratic Party after he took Trump down in 2020. And then the party held on and did better than expected in the 2022 midterms. He could have stepped aside then and been given all manner of tributes for old Joe. He took down Trump. He got us, back into the White House, et cetera. But instead, by carrying on and insisting on a second term, which was never part of the deal, he has now destroyed his reputation because he's probably going to lose to Trump, which turns him from a hero to a villain in the Democratic Party. Just talk to Hillary Clinton about what it's like to turn from a hero to a villain overnight.
Again, that with Hillary Clinton, same as with Joe Biden, it's all self-inflicted damage. You know, the basket of deplorables, semi-fascists was Joe Biden's basket of deplorables. And it seems that he just doesn't understand that this guy who claimed unity at least 16 times in his inauguration speech is doing little but dividing the country with that kind of talk. I mean, it's the kind of irresponsible rhetoric that Donald Trump was accused of for 4 years in office.
But I mean, picture yourself as the average voter who likes to watch the presidential inauguration every 4 years. And Joe Biden comes on and uses the word unity or the equivalent like 16 times in his inauguration. And then they see months later on July 4th, he stands in front of a blood red, fascist looking backdrop and calls anyone who voted for Trump a danger to the nation, semi-fascist, and basically, how confused must that average voter be? He said, well, wait a minute, he called for unity, and now he's becoming more divisive than any president in American history by demonizing half the voters of the country, which, by the way, is not a terrific electoral strategy.
It won't go down as one of the best in the history's playbooks. Now, Tim, finally on this topic, I just want to pull back to the idea that so many people have been talking about. This is a danger. It's the death of democracy. Democracy is on the line. And you spoke earlier, and this kind of brought something to my head that I've just noted down here about why they're using that kind of language. And it seems to me that if they were saying the constitutional republic is on the line, well, that's a sensible way of speaking about what the nation is. But by using the very word democracy, it gives it a lineage. It gives a history and a provenance, if you will, all the way back 2,500 years ago to ancient Greece, Athenian democracy. It's essentially what they're saying by using the term democracy rather than the constitutional republic. What they're saying is the entire history of Western civilization is on the brink if you don't cast your ballot correctly in this election. And it's almost like subtle propaganda to try and tie everything that we value, the art, the culture, the history, the languages, into one thing and say, this man, this would-be president, this former and would-be president, could destroy everything that has been 2,500 years in the making.
Well, it's a
Thoughts
nice
on that,
try.
or have I gone too far?
It's a nice try by the left, but I think one of the principal reasons they refer to democracy, beyond your excellent observation there that it puts a historical root on it, is that frankly progressives don't really believe in the Constitution. They don't like to refer to us as a constitutional republic because they don't like to be constrained by the Constitution. And thus, if you think about it, when you look at the kind of things they tried to do with a one vote majority in the Senate, right? What they tried to do was pack the Supreme Court, add left-wing territories on as states so they could get more electoral votes. They tried to do things that are the true threat to democracy. They don't like the Constitution. They want to get rid of it. And I think that's the reason that they refer, among other reasons, to democracy, because it does sound like a big, long historical project to restore in a way that only Joe Biden can restore it. But if you think about it, think about where democracy will be if Joe Biden wins. Okay, look at the dominance of progressive culture and progressive politics in this country. If we affirm as a country the riots on college campuses, the open border, the inattention to crime, the hollowing out of cities, if we see Joe Biden for another 4 years, those trends are only going to be doubled down. And the idea of new states impacting the Supreme Court will be alive and kicking again.
Tim Donner, thanks ever so much.
Pleasure, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.